Consistent use of something often leads to familiarity, and with time, proficiency. But does the same apply to nature? No matter how deeply one immerses themselves in it, nature remains unpredictable. That's why an 89-year-old man, who had explored the same stretch of wilderness for over 40 years, was ultimately claimed by it. Here's how it happened. In the quiet community of Jerome, Florida, where tall slash pines lined the horizon and the air carried the damp scent of cypress, Robert Markel lived a life shaped by routine and solitude. At 89, he was a man from another era, someone who hadn't come to escape the world, but to be part of the land itself. His body was worn, his joints stiff with age, but his mind remained sharp, like the whittling knife he always carried in his back pocket. Robert's house was a small, weathered one-story, with chip paint and a rusted tin roof, sitting on a modest lot that bordered the dense woods of the South Bear Management Unit. Beyond the pine and cypress trees lay thousands of acres filled with wildlife: bobcats, raccoons, deer, and over 1,000 black bears. Most wouldn't choose to live so close to that kind of wilderness, but Robert had. He moved to Jerome nearly 40 years ago after retiring from rail maintenance, worn out by city life. It was Clara, his late wife, who'd first wanted the quiet, just trees, wind, and cicadas. When Clara passed 12 years ago, Robert stayed. The house still held her memory in every corner, in the crocheted blanket folded neatly on the back of the couch, in the rose bush she'd planted by the mailbox, in the old cuckoo clock that still chirped every hour, though it ran 2 minutes slow. The only creature that kept him company now was Rusty, a scrappy terrier mix with wiry fur and a graying muzzle, who'd shown up on Robert's doorstep 6 years earlier, hungry and half wild. Robert fed him once, and the dog had never left. Rusty had become more than just a pet. He was Robert's shadow, his alarm system, his friend. Together they kept a sacred daily rhythm: early mornings and twilight walks, long stretches of porch sitting, and a shared disdain for squirrels. Rusty had a keen nose and a sharp bark, and though small, he was unafraid of anything that moved. The morning of May 5th, 2025 began like any other, cloaked in the thick stillness of pre-dawn. The world outside Robert's windows was damp from an overnight drizzle, and low fog curled like steam among the trees. Robert stirred awake before the sun rose, roused not by any alarm, but by the internal clock that decades of routine had wound tight. The mattress creaked beneath his weight as he sat up slowly, letting his joints realign. He glanced at the cuckoo clock, 5:07 a.m. Rusty was already awake, perched by the door with ears alert and tail thumping against the hardwood floor. He pulled on his flannel shirt, threadbare but warm, buttoned it halfway and made his way to the kitchen, using the wall for balance. The house was dim and cool. Outside, a barred owl called once, then fell silent. Robert brewed his usual mug of black coffee, bitter and strong, and tossed a biscuit to Rusty, who snatched it midair. The dog's eyes sparkled with anticipation, as if he knew what came next. After pulling on a canvas jacket and slipping his feet into mud-caked boots, Robert grabbed his walking stick, carved from a piece of hickory Clara had found on one of their hikes years ago, and clipped Rusty's leash to his collar. Together they stepped onto the porch and into the slow bleeding dawn. The early morning light was soft and blue, filtered through the high canopy. The path behind the house, once a deer trail, had become their daily route. It wound through dense palmetto scrub, around an old saw palmetto stump, and followed the edge of a shallow creek before circling back. Robert knew every bend, every low-hanging branch, every place where snakes liked to sun themselves. As they walked, the birds began their chorus. Cardinals, wrens, a distant woodpecker tapping rhythmically at bark. The world was waking up, and for Robert there was peace in the repetition. But that morning, something was different. Rusty grew tense about 15 minutes into the walk. His ears stood erect, his gait slowed, and his body language shifted from curious to alert. Robert noticed immediately. The little dog stopped, growled low, and stared into the thicket just off the trail. The old man's vision wasn't what it used to be. and shadows played tricks in the half-light. He squinted, seeing nothing but the shifting sway of Spanish moss and the tangled underbrush. Still, he felt it too, that subtle shift in the air, a quiet that wasn't natural. The woods around Jerome were rarely silent. There were always frogs chirping, insects buzzing, birds flitting. But now an eerie hush has fallen. Even the wind seemed to have paused. Rusty began pulling at the leash, whining softly. Robert's heart picked up. His thoughts drifted to the warning signs posted on the road into town. Bear country. Do not feed wildlife. Just a few months ago, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission had sent out a mailer warning residents to be especially cautious during spring, when mother bears were raising cubs and adult males began roaming wider territories in search of food or mates. He remembered stories, mostly exaggerated, told over coffee at the bait shop. Bears getting into garbage cans, stealing pet food left on porches, even swiping a frozen ham from someone's outdoor freezer. But never had anyone been attacked. Not in Jerome. Robert looked to his left and saw something that made his stomach clench. A tree along the path, freshly scored with 4 deep claw marks, high up on the bark, higher than Rusty could have reached. The gouges were raw, sap still weeping. He ran a calloused hand over the marks, measuring their depth with his fingers. Despite the tension, he didn't panic. He'd lived among bears for years and always followed the rules. He never left food out. He kept his garbage sealed. He even stopped feeding the birds last fall because it might attract scavengers. Still, he didn't like this quiet. Didn't like the way Rusty kept glancing over his shoulder. He clicked his tongue. Come on, Rusty, let's head back. We've seen enough for today. They turned around, with Robert scanning the woods now, eyes moving from shadow to shadow, the walking stick tight in his grip. The trees seemed closer than usual. The morning light had grown brighter, but the forest around them felt darker somehow, compressed. Then, behind them, a single snap of a twig echoed through the hush. Not the wind. Robert froze. Rusty spun around, barking sharply. Something was following them, but he didn't see it yet. Back at the house, Robert Markel unclipped Rusty's leash. The dog trotted off, nose to the ground, ears up. It was an early May morning in Jerome, Florida, humid, with the smell of damp earth in the air. The sun was just rising over the cypress trees. Robert walked across the yard slowly. His hips and knees ached, but he had chores to do. He started with the garbage cans, securing the lids with the new metal clasps his daughter Ellen had insisted on. Satisfied the cans were tight, he made his way to the chicken coop. The hens clucked as he tossed a generous scoop of corn and pellets into the run, watching them bustle and peck. Rusty remained close, eyes flicking from the coop to the tree line, nose twitching. The dog paused at the edge of a bush, sniffed something intently, then let out a low whine. Robert didn't see the faint tracks in the soft earth near the coop, nor did he notice the small tuft of black fur caught on a low broken branch just beyond the fence. The clues were there, clear signs that something large had passed through, but he was tired, more so than usual. His legs throbbed from the earlier walk, and his breath came in short bursts. He turned and climbed the porch steps, easing himself into the creaking wooden swing his late wife had loved. It groaned beneath his weight. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the quiet surround him. Somewhere in the distance, a mourning dove called. The chickens clucked softly. And then, Rusty barked. It wasn't a casual bark. It was the harsh, urgent sound of alarm. Robert opened his eyes just in time to see Rusty bolting across the yard, heading for the edge of the property where the palmettos grew thick. The dog's lean body tore through the tall grass, barking furiously, tail stiff, ears pinned. Robert called out, but the dog didn't hesitate. Robert groaned, pushing himself to his feet, his hand grasping for the walking stick he kept by the door. His heart was racing, not just from exertion, but from a gut-level worry that something wasn't right. He'd seen the dog chase squirrels and armadillos before, but this wasn't that. He crossed the yard slowly, every step jarring his knees. The grass was damp with dew, and his shoes slipped on roots and patches of exposed dirt. "Rusty!" He shouted again, voice rasping with age. The woods beyond his fence looked darker than usual. He passed the edge of his property and pushed into the underbrush, vines tugging at his legs and branches clawing at his arms. His stick helped him find footing as he navigated the familiar but now oddly sinister terrain. He was about 100 yards from the house when he heard the change. Rusty's bark morphed into a high-pitched, desperate yelp. Panic surged in Robert's chest. He quickened his pace, breathing shallow and ragged. The birds had gone silent, and the stillness was oppressive. Then he saw it, a massive black shape moving among the trees. A black bear, much larger than any he'd ever seen, stood just ahead, its bulk rippling with muscle beneath its dark, matted fur. It loomed over Rusty, who was crouched against a fallen log, body trembling but eyes wide with defiance. The bear snarled, its lips pulled back to reveal yellowed teeth, and then with terrifying speed it swiped at the dog. Rusty flew sideways, yelping in pain, landing hard on the mossy ground. Robert didn't hesitate. Despite the terror knotting in his chest, he shouted, "Hey, get away from him!" and raised his walking stick, waving it high. The bear turned, its dark eyes locking onto Robert with chilling intelligence. There was a heartbeat of stillness, one terrible second of recognition. Then the bear charged. The animal slammed into Robert like a wrecking ball. He hit the ground with bone-cracking force, his stick snapping under him. The wind was knocked from his lungs as pain erupted in his chest. A heavy paw raked across his shoulder, tearing through fabric and flesh alike. He screamed, more from the shock than the pain. He tried to fight back, swinging wildly with what was left of his stick, but it was no match. The bear reared up, snarling, and came down again, claws like blades. Rusty, bloodied but not beaten, lunged back into the fray. He bit at the bear's legs, snapping and snarling, refusing to let his owner die alone. The bear roared, a deafening primal sound that echoed through the forest, and turned on the dog again. Robert, half conscious, tried to crawl, reaching toward Rusty with a trembling hand. He couldn't see clearly now. Blood stung his eyes. The forest spun around him. The pain in his arm was white-hot as the bear clamped its jaws around it, dragging him like a rag doll. He heard Rusty whimper one last time. Then, only silence. The sun was already high by the time Ellen arrived. She was used to her father answering the phone by 6:30 a.m. sharp. He never missed a call. When she tried again at 7 o'clock and still got nothing, she knew something was wrong. She drove over in silence, heart pounding the whole way. The front door was cracked open, Rusty's leash abandoned on the porch. Ellen called out, "Dad?" No answer. She stepped outside and noticed the disturbed dirt near the coop, the chickens unusually agitated, and then tracks, deep, fresh, clawed. Her hands trembled as she dialed 911. Within the hour, deputies from the Levy County Sheriff's Office and officers from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission were on site. They followed the trail into the woods and found Robert's body just beyond the fallen log. His shirt was torn, blood soaking the earth beneath him. His walking stick lay shattered beside him. Rusty was only a few feet away, still and lifeless. Ellen fell to her knees. The scream that escaped her was raw and piercing. Officers had to hold her back as they secured the area. The FWC's investigation moved quickly. The area was closed off. Evidence was gathered, deep paw prints, scratch marks on trees, and tufts of fur that clung to branches like macabre flags. Jerome had never seen anything like it. There had been bear sightings, yes, bears rummaging through trash or lumbering across back roads, but never an attack, and certainly never a fatal one. That afternoon, FWC officers set up traps throughout the surrounding forest. Within hours, they euthanized 3 adult male bears, one weighing 207 pounds, another 263, and the last, a staggering 434 pounds. A fourth was seen but managed to flee into the deeper woods. The bodies were sent to a wildlife pathology lab in Gainesville. The test confirmed what everyone feared. The 263-pound bear had human remains in its stomach. DNA on its claws and muzzle matched both Robert and Rusty. Trace DNA was also found on the porch and garbage cans, indicating the bear had grown accustomed to the property, possibly visiting for days or weeks before the attack. The other two bears tested negative for any trace of human contact. The news shook Jerome to its core. The attack marked the first fatal black bear incident in Florida's recorded history. People began checking their trash can lids twice, walking their dogs in daylight only, and buying bear spray by the case. Ellen stayed in her father's house, haunted by its silence. The swing still creaked in the breeze, and Rusty's toys remained scattered on the porch. The townspeople came by with food, hugs, and sorrowful eyes. Still, nothing filled the void. Robert had been a constant in Jerome. He was a World War II veteran, a retired electrician, and a storyteller whose tales about the old Florida days had become part of the town's fabric. Rusty had been his shadow, a wiry mutt with more heart than muscle, loved by the whole block. Life in Jerome moved on, but it had changed. Evening walks now included headlamps and bear bells. School children were taught how to identify bear tracks. Wildlife officers gave talks at town meetings. Don't leave pet food outside. Secure your trash. Never approach a bear. The South Bear Management Unit, home to over 1,000 black bears, was no longer just a point of pride. It was a presence, looming and unpredictable. People respected it, feared it, but also better understood the balance they were a part of. For Ellen, the pain never vanished, but she found peace in remembering, and that's what truly matters.